Hi there, everyone. Welcome to week 8. We are going to talk this week primarily about a specific tactic, which is your first tactic for your client project in the class, fact sheets. Before I get started today, I want to remind you that there are going to be, well, it's not a reminder because I haven't told you yet, there is going to be an update provided on probably about Wednesday related to your midterm. I want to just give you a word of, let's see, not warning, support, and let you know that the midterm is going to be something that's going to be more of a learning activity and a learning process for you than it is really an assessment. So I haven't finished working everything out yet, but I wanted to let you know about that, and I'll probably have a video update for you on Wednesday, probably at the latest end of the day. Okay? So I just wanted to give you a heads up for that because I know it's listed on our calendar. I think I might have already moved the due date to not this week, but the following week. But anyway, keep your eyes and ears open. There'll be an update about the midterm on Wednesday. To give you some security or comfort, it will be something that you can use all of your resources and your notes for. It's not going to be a test where you have to come in or do anything like that, but it will be all online. And really, again, it's going to be used as a learning tool rather than an assessment. So it won't be a traditional exam type of thing. So anyway, I hope that gives you some comfort. Don't want to scare you, but I do want to give you a heads up about that. So let's see if I can get my slides going here. Okay, so just to kind of do a quick reminder of what tactics are, and then we're going to talk more specifically this whole video and the slide set about fact sheets. So as you recall, Smith, this is Smith's definition of tactics, but basically tactics are those visible elements of a PR or marketing communication campaign or program. They are a specific vehicle through which an organization shares its messages with its various publics. And this is the part of the class where we're really going to be helping each other because you will have some interactive stuff coming up, workshops, crafting good messages on behalf of our organization. And how do we communicate those messages to various audiences? So that's our goal, and those are our definition of tactics this week, or from last week. As we talk today about fact sheets specifically, I wanted to bring to your attention again Smith's 4 categories of media, and just ask you to be thinking as I go through this material today, think about which category Smith might put fact sheets into. Which one of these 4 categories he would consider fact sheets a part of. It may be that you think he would consider them in more than one category. So just think about that and think about why. Okay, fact sheets are one of my favorite things to teach about because they are so diverse in how they can look and what kind of information they can have. So they're kind of exciting to me in that way. But your chapter that you read was a supplemental chapter about fact sheets, and the second part of the chapter is about media advisories, and we're not doing stuff like that. So you only really need to read that first part of the chapter that talks about fact sheets. But essentially, fact sheets are these easy to read, fast access to information, either about your organization or an issue. Some of the key elements are that the information needs to really stand out visually on a fact sheet, but in doing so, you really need to make sure that you help a busy audience find the information it needs. So if you think about a fact sheet being a source of information for reporters or editorial writers or consumers or clients or other key publics that your organization needs to communicate with, you have to be thinking about what does that audience need and why, and how to present that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through here. I do want to mention a little bit the chapter that I gave you to read from Smith. It might be the same Smith, but it's a different textbook that wrote our textbook. But He talks about two types of fact sheets in the chapter, and I wanted to just share with you that we're not going to really follow that differentiation that he talks about between news fact sheets, what he calls news fact sheets, and background fact sheets. We're going to just refer to everything as a fact sheet, and then say that the topic of a fact sheet can be any number of different things. So it's not important that you understand the differentiation he makes between news fact sheets and background fact sheets, but it is important that you understand what goes into a good fact sheet. And so that's what we'll be focusing on here. Regardless of whether it's a news fact sheet or a background fact sheet, really it's going to answer those five W questions, five W's and one H. Even when you come to a background type of fact sheet, you're often going to find yourself needing to answer those who, what, where, when, why, and how questions. So although Smith positions them in the chapter, those questions, as part of a news fact sheet, they really are something you need to consider in every type of different fact sheet that you potentially would create. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of the great things that he talks about on fact sheets and what goes into good fact sheets. I've tried to provide as many illustrations and examples of fact sheets along the way as possible, and we'll point out some characteristics of good ones and not so good ones along the way in the video here. But in terms of the topic for a fact sheet, it can really be anything that is of importance that your client organization needs to communicate with an audience. That's why I'm not interested in limiting ourselves to news fact sheets or background fact sheets. So it can be anything from, facts related to, you can see here is from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is a U.S. Government agency, facts about child mistreatment and what happens, how it affects children, some statistics, that type of thing. It can also be a fact sheet. Fact sheets can be about a new project that an organization is starting. It can be about the organization's history, a time you might do an organization history or background. Fact sheet would be if your organization is celebrating some kind of milestone, so maybe 150 years of existence, or something much simpler, 25 years or something like that. So it can be related to your organization's history. It can be related to an issue that your organization either works on, works with, or that's important to your audiences. So again, this example here, preventing child maltreatment, is a really good example of an issue that's important to people who look to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for information. So child neglect, child illness, children dying, that all has to do with the health of children, and that's an issue that's important to a variety of audiences that look to the CDC for information. Another time you see fact sheets sometimes are when there is a new top executive or administrator within an organization. This happens a lot, especially with for-profit organizations. I remember specifically Coca-Cola one time issuing a fact sheet with specific details about a new high-ranking, I don't want to say CEO, but a new top executive in their organization, in the company, that had been recently hired, and there were some interesting facts about that person that they wanted to highlight, and so they did a fact sheet on that person. Another one can be product specifications, sales figures, things like that. So anything you want to highlight that is able to be put in sort of in a one-page document that has anything to do with your organization or what it's interested in, what area it works in. But something that's important to know about fact sheets, especially if you are providing them with information about a very recent event or something that is a little bit more newsworthy. Fact sheets are often drafted in response to audience needs at a fairly quick turnaround time. So they're often used in news and crisis situations. Is a great example of when fact sheets are often distributed in a quick turnaround time. But regardless of how quick the turnaround time needs to be, you need to anticipate, as the author or the creator of a fact sheet, Which audiences need what information? We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's a key element of a fact sheet, being able to understand what does your audience need and how do they need it, okay? So as I mentioned earlier, fact sheets are freestanding documents. Ooh, sorry. Here I have an example of a World Health Organization fact sheet. You can see the screen grab here, and then I've linked it here online. If we go back here, it's a freestanding document. The idea is that you want to make it something that can go on the front and back of generally one page. And you want to make sure it's fairly self-contained because you don't want people having to refer to another document or another source of information. It's kind of a one-stop shop in that one document. That said, you don't necessarily, this doesn't necessarily mean that you don't cite information or you don't refer to other important sources of information that could be helpful. So you want to have the information be freestanding, contained within the document, but that doesn't mean you don't include statistics or information that are cited from other sources. And I'll show you some examples of this later on. But essentially, the purpose of a fact sheet is to distill down information that can be very complex into simple, more straightforward bulleted statements or shorter statements. And so, like I said, often bulleted, and often emphasize, fact sheets often emphasize succinctness and brevity, shortness, being brief. But that brevity depends on the topic, and that's why I pulled up this great WHO example here. You can look at this fact sheet that was updated September 2016, and you can scroll down for, a few scrolls, and you can say, well, this isn't very succinct. This is a very in-depth fact sheet. And to a degree, I would agree with you, except that if you look at the topic of this fact sheet, immunization and coverage, boy, and from the World Health Organization as well, that's not something that is going to be able to be kind of bullet-pointed brief. By virtue of its topics, or of its topic, it has a lot of important statements that are included here. So what they've done is they've pulled out some key facts and bulleted those, and then made the overall fact sheet itself a little bit longer, which is certainly acceptable because the people who created this are thinking about who's going to need this information and what information makes this a comprehensive fact sheet. So for their purposes, it's okay that it's a little bit longer and not as brief. So again, recognize that brevity depends on what's the topic, what's the content, and who are you aiming your fact sheet at. Some essential elements and things that you absolutely need to have on your client organization fact sheet are some of these. The first thing you need to have on there is some kind of reference to your organization or your client, and some identifying information. So things like a logo or whatever the brand image is for your organization. One of the few flaws in this great fact sheet, overall pretty good fact sheet, this one's linked as well, so you can see where you can find the source of that and take a look at that further online. But one of the problems with this fact sheet is that very small, down at the bottom here, you can see this is from the CDC, not the link here, but the sources is from CDC. And, you don't know from looking at this fact sheet who the organization is that put this out. Is it an organization called Drinking with Diabetes? Is it the CDC? Is that just where information's from? It's not really clear. So you want to make sure when you create a fact sheet that there's some representation clear of your organization, your client. Okay. There also needs to be some contact information, which is also missing from this example. Who is the person that you would contact, or that a reporter would contact, or somebody reading this who would contact, they would contact for more information, or if they had a question about the information. Okay. One of the things I think this fact sheet does well is that it's very clear what this fact sheet is about. It does not state it is a fact sheet, but from the way that it's designed and the information and the headers that it uses, you can really see that this is about consuming alcohol. It's probably related somehow to diabetes education, but the topic is clearly, or the fact sheet itself is clearly a fact sheet, okay? If you look at the subject, clearly it's about drinking, right? So you can see it's well designed in terms of what is the topic and that it is a fact sheet, even though it doesn't state that it's a fact sheet on the document itself. Another thing that this document does pretty well is use content headings, and those are these sort of orange arrow areas here. Basically, this lets your eye, as somebody who's looking at this lets your eye know this is another section of information. And here's yet another section of information on blood alcohol concentration. Okay, so that really helps you arrange information. Think about if you, in your organizational profile, you use subject headers. That helps you organize information. Same thing can go for creating a good fact sheet. Some more details about fact sheets. Why write them? Why use them? They can be fairly straightforward and easy to make and easy to understand if they're designed well. And I will talk in a little bit about design. You don't have to be an expert in design to create a good fact sheet. You do need to think about specifically who is the intended audience. What kind of information does this audience need? Do they need information that's pretty in-depth, or do they need pretty general information? What do they care about? Making sure that you include the information, the questions that they're going to ask related to the topic is really important. What goes in it? Again, what do they want to know? But a lot of fact sheets use facts, numbers. So how do you find good facts or information? Well, it could be that your organization puts out numbers that are used, but you can also use sources that are online, newspaper reports, government reports, published papers, academic papers, things like that. So you can think about what kinds of information go in there. Use lots of different facts that pertain to the topic. You do need to focus on making sure that the numbers, whatever numbers you include on your fact sheet, whatever facts you include, are accurate and credible, and they're from trustworthy sources. Make sure that you only include information that you're able to verify. And then I would also say make sure that, especially if you're releasing numbers and dates on a fact sheet, you want to make sure that your information that you've got is the most up-to-date information that is out there. You want to make sure that you're not putting numbers from 2014 in there if it's 2017, and there are numbers from, say, 2016 that are available, making sure that you have up-to-date information. And then how do you present information? Well, as I said, we'll talk a little bit about design, but presenting information that's easy to understand, making sure that you have some sort of balance in terms of content, if that's appropriate, and then explaining things that need explaining. If there's a complicated new term, that you define that term, or that you use acronyms and you explain those if those are needed for your particular audience. A couple of things to think about that you want to avoid when you're creating fact sheets. You don't want to replicate or be repetitious. You also don't want too much of the same type of information. So you don't want everything to be all numbers. You don't want too many facts either. You don't want the whole thing to be just a list of 20 bullet points. You also want to make sure that you avoid this idea of just throwing a bunch of facts on a page. There needs to be a lot of strategic thinking that goes into creating one of these. So generally, fact sheets are one page, although that can vary greatly, especially now that a lot of fact sheets are available online. You often see some type of heading and a date somewhere. The date doesn't always have to go at the top. And oftentimes there is a design for a fact sheet from an organization, and then each year that information is updated. Okay, and good design is generally easy to achieve now with a lot of different fairly simple design programs that you can use. So what makes a good fact sheet? Well, asking yourself if this stuff is clear. Is it clear what the document is intended to do? So as an example here, this protection against Zika virus infection. What's the document's purpose? Well, just from even reading the top here, I can see, okay, yes, it's about preventing infection from Zika virus. But as I look at the rest of the fact sheet here, I can also tell that they're really interested in making sure that women who are pregnant do not get infected. So not only are they trying to warn people generally, but they're trying to warn women who are pregnant or going to be pregnant or breastfeeding about the risks. This is also linked, as you can see here, so you can check that out online. This is from Georgia, the state of Georgia's Department of Public Health. Another question to ask, who's the intended audience? Well, the intended audience here is potentially women who are or will become pregnant, but also you need to think about it's not just pregnant women, right? There's somebody else involved in getting pregnant, so it can be for men as well, because the Zika virus can also be transmitted sexually as well. So that's why they talk about using condoms or having sex during pregnancy. Some things that you might not think of when you see a pregnant woman image, that's not necessarily the second thing you think of is the other party, but it's very important in this particular topic to make sure everybody understands and is aware. And so there's some detail here that you might not have in other fact sheets. They also talk about some symptoms, which I think is really great, and then they talk about what are some of the potential problems. Why is it so important that you don't get infected with this virus? So you need to think about what level information is needed by your audience. I want to make sure that that information is well organized. I think this does a great job of having having this image of a pregnant or this graphic of a pregnant woman. I think that's really great. Are appropriate elements emphasized or de-emphasized? Is it clear what kind of information is important here? When you think about creating a fact sheet, you want to make sure that you figure out the information to go on there first, and then you design your document. You don't design your document as you're determining what information to include on it. So a little bit about good design. You definitely want to learn from good examples. There is a handout that will be linked on Canvas that has descriptions of each of these design elements: balance, proportion, order, contrast, all of this stuff. And again, you do not need to be an expert in design to understand elements and what makes a good fact sheet. So you might look at this fact sheet and say, oh, it's too wordy. Well, you also have to consider who it's intended for. It's intended to describe to the audience consumer research that's done by the Food Safety Inspection Service and how they develop outreach efforts. So this is not necessarily a fact sheet that is for the average member of the public or the average consumer. This is for somebody who's interested in a little bit more in-depth information. And so the fact that it's arranged this way with a little, some more wording maybe than you or I might consider ideal, it's intended for this specific audience. I think they do a nice job here in terms of arranging white space, using a little bit of color and contrast, and a photographic image here. So this is a fairly well-designed example. But I will encourage you to look at, and I will expect you to pay attention to these elements of design when you create your own fact sheet. Okay, so heads up on that. Here's another example of a fact sheet. This is one that initially you might look at and say, gosh, there's lots of numbers and graphics here. But I think it's really well done. They're showing you here USAID, which is the Agency for International Development. This is a U.S. government agency. They're showing you in Mali, under a complex emergency, how much money has been spent in the fiscal year 2013. Okay, it was issued on this date, and they give you specific information about humanitarian stuff, food insecurity, refugees, 4.3 million in Mali during this as of February 2013. 4.3 million people were in need of assistance. Sorry about that. So lots of detail in this, but that's probably the level of information that somebody who's looking for information about Mali and their emergency funding and how much the USAID has given them, that probably accounts for what people need in terms of this fact sheet. Here's another example of a fact sheet. This one's a lot more simple, a lot fewer words. And you can see here about half of it is taken up with the image and the heading at the top here. I really like this fact sheet because of this use of a large image here, and then this sort of a bright idea. I thought they were very clever with this. And I'll show you the back of this as well. This is the back of the fact sheet that gives more detailed information. And what I like about it, in addition to this first part, is they tell you what to do if you want to participate in this. Here's the first step. And then here are 2 ways to save. And then here's where you can find more information. Excuse me. And then here's this image of the brand image from USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. I never say it very well. So some decent examples. I wanted to give you some resources that you can take a look at on your own time, but I will click on them just to show you what they look like. This first one is about just some basic design elements, what makes clean design, all sorts of great resources here to kind of help you if you're somebody like me who feels very out of her depth in terms of design. That's me, and so you might be interested in some of these resources. This second one, or this next one, whoops, let's see, here it is. 10 basic elements of design. This is a blog post about design, talks a little bit about the use of color, shape, that type of thing, so it might be of interest to you. This last link is about really visual designing for usability of websites, but it does give some information about contrast and color and scale and things like that, so it might be of interest to you as well. So for this week's activity, what I'm going to ask you to do is, given what you know about fact sheets from this slide presentation, from the links in it, and from the reading that you have, there are some linked PDF files in Week 8 module. And they are all saved on Canvas, but they're examples of fact sheets. And what I'd like you to do is choose 2 of those. And I want you to analyze 2 examples and answer the following questions and submit that this week, okay? I strongly recommend that you do this before you create your fact sheet assignment, which is in a second video. But I want you to look at these particular questions and answer these particular questions. From looking at the fact sheet, can you tell what the purpose or overall message is for each of the 2 fact sheets? Okay, so you're going to go through this process for the first fact sheet, and you're going to go through this process for the second fact sheet. In doing so, I want you to also put in your document, your Word document, a screen grab of the fact sheet that you are analyzing. So that'll help me so that I have a visual there as I'm looking at your responses. So what's the purpose of the fact sheet? What's the overall message? Who do you think, based on what you know, is or are the intended audience or audiences, can be more than one group, for each fact sheet? And then based on the information that you have, what elements do you think are well done or effective in each of these 2 fact sheets? And then what, if any, elements on the fact sheets are ineffective or things that are even maybe distracting, okay? So remember to put an insert in there of an image of the fact sheet. You can do a screen grab real quick, and so that I can see what you're referring to in your analysis, okay? So please also, as you're doing this, don't use any of the examples that are in this slide presentation. I think I've removed all of those as potential files, but if you see something in there that has been in this presentation, don't use that, because what I tried to do was use good ones in the presentation for you, okay? So let me know if you have questions, but that's your Week 8 activity. Coming up in the next video is information about your client project fact sheet assignment. So we'll see you over on that in that video in just a few minutes.